Awesome game today. Superstar QB Victory Stone brings in the win single-handedly.
No, not quite.
What do you mean? You threw that last touchdown pass like 43 yards.
Doesn't matter if there's not someone on the other end to make the catch. I think what Lantern is saying is that it's time for some teamwork. So let's pull it together.
Yeah, baby! Clap it up!
So I heard some bad things about this movie. Actually, I heard a lot of bad things about this movie. My brother watched it upon release and he absolutely despised it. Now, I trust my brother's judgment, and from the small clips I saw, I pretty much agreed with his sentiments. It looked like utter trash, it looked cheap, and it looked like a quick cash grab to take advantage of the recent New 52 run on the comics. And in many ways, Justice League War fits that criteria, but that said, I didn't hate it. Superheroes are menaces. Activists, the police, and the military alike are hunting down these masked vigilantes for causing so much destruction in their supposed crusades to stop crime and suffering. However, when several people start mysteriously vanishing and bombs are mysteriously placed in key populated cities, it's up to these heroes to stop them. Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, is aided by Batman in stopping one of these kidnappings and recovering the alien bomb that the culprits, what would become known as a parademon, had planted. They eventually meet up with Superman, and after a brief misunderstanding, the three start to work together to uncover its secrets, why it was sent here, and how to stop it. Meanwhile, Diana of Themyscira, or of Paradise Island, aka Wonder Woman, is her people's political envoy to the United States, and it isn't long before she's called to action again, as the bombs turn out to be mother boxes that can summon boom tubes, allowing an army of parademons to attack the planet. The invaders assault the President of the United States, and both Superman and Wonder Woman fly out to save him, gaining an interest in one another along the way. Meanwhile, still, Victor Stone is having the football game of a lifetime, watched on by a young Billy Batson. Victor is disheartened that his workaholic scientist father thinks nothing of his personal accomplishments, and in a rage, grabs the mother box right as it opens the boom tube, maiming him. In a frantic rush, Victor's father attaches experimental alien tech onto his son to save his life, and he becomes the superhero known as Cyborg, in this canon becoming so through the use of apocalyptian technology, allowing him to understand and converse with the mother box. Though inexperienced, with the help of the Flash and Shazam, the alter ego of Billy Batson, he's able to fight off the parademons attacking the lab and rendezvous with the other heroes somewhere in Metropolis. But just as they start to understand what's happening, the big bad booms in. Darkseid approaches, and it's revealed that the kidnappings, now happening on a global scale due to the invasion, is used to harvest the organic material from planetary life to create new parademons. Left with little other choice, the heroes fight Darkseid and his army, but it doesn't go well for them. Green Lantern's arm is broken, Superman is captured, and all of the heroes are downed in either one or two shots. With Darkseid on the rampage, Batman allows himself to be captured to go rescue Superman, while the other heroes are tasked with stopping Darkseid, hoping to do so by blinding him and cutting him off from his main weapon of the Omega Beams. In the end, the heroes succeed in their mission of crippling the god, and with the timely arrival of Superman and the combined efforts of every hero, they manage to force Darkseid back through his own boom tube, along with his army of parademons, rescue the people they've already captured, and ultimately win the day. And thus, the Justice League was born. So that sounds like a lot, right? It sounds like there are a lot of moving parts and different characters and a lot to keep track of, right? In some ways, yes, but it becomes very obvious as you watch the movie that, in the end, it's just one long action scene that happens to be set after the character introductions. This blistering pace can be seen as the movie's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Structurally, War shares many similarities with Justice League: The New Frontier, the second ever DC animated original movie to be made. It sees Green Lantern trying to prove himself as a hero, it sees him, the Flash, and one or two others as something of the New Guard, while Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are established and are in pretty much the same situations as they were in that movie. Batman is hunted, Wonder Woman is a Warhawk weirdo, and Superman is the country's baby. And in the end, they all have to combine their powers to combat a seemingly unstoppable alien menace, where much of the final encounter is done after Superman was soundly defeated. However, while that movie arguably took too much time establishing the world and its characters, characters, this movie has the opposite problem. No single character is given a complete backstory except for Cyborg, who is so ultimately superfluous, save for the final sending everyone back through the boom tube thing that they could have hand-waved away as Batman figuring it out by himself while he was captured or something. The result is these really awkward non-introductions, like Batman dully explaining his backstory minutes before the final battle.
My name is Bruce Wayne. When I was 10, my parents were murdered in front of my eyes. I've spent my life training to fight the same sort of criminals that took them from me. But this is different. This isn't about me.
You're telling me this why?
We know next to nothing about any of these characters, and all of them rely on prior knowledge to garner any semblance of interest from the viewer. We want to see the heroes succeed because they are generically similar to the heroes we have cared about and rooted for in the past, not for any amount of work, or lack thereof, made in war. For a sequel, this would be fine, but this isn't a sequel. It's just another entirely disconnected story in a sea of movies with entirely disconnected stories. And I know I said the pacing was the movie's greatest strength, and it is. While you don't give a fuck about any of the characters, you're rarely left with a moment where something visually interesting isn't happening. And the plot is constantly developing, we're getting new tidbits about the mother boxes and the invasion, and all of this combined gives us a breakneck viewing experience to the point that in those very, very brief scenes of slowdown, such as when Wonder Woman is discovering ice cream right before she goes to save the presidents, it feels like a major pacing whiplash, if that makes sense. I would say if you're drunk and if you want to watch something with zero substance and where you don't have to pay all that much attention to it, this would be the movie for you. But should that be the proper introduction to the New 52 universe? Spoilers, this universe is the one we'll be following for like a dozen more movies in the latter half of this series. And to come out of it saying that the characters and world sucked, but it looked and felt pretty, isn't exactly what you want to hear, right? From what I understand, several of these characters do improve over the course of the timeline, but my god, most of them were terrible here. To start, all of them have this really shitty attitude about the world, a kind of edgelord cynicism you'd expect to get from some punk teenager in the 90s. You know, where they all have bad attitudes and more or less hate the people they're forced to work with. While much of that can be excused for Billy Batson, who is a self-obsessed teenager, much less leniency is in order for our other 6 heroes. Well, 5, because the Flash is pretty much the only decent human being there. Batman casually invades Green Lantern's personal space and steals his stuff, then mocks him for not catching him. Wonder Woman is headstrong and arrogant, and despite being a political envoy, left the White House because she got bored waiting for the president, and generally acted like a child the entire movie. Cyborg is sullen, I guess. That's kind of all he gets, and any arc they may be implying, note implying, not actually putting any time or effort into, was done better by the Teen Titans TV show from the mid-2000s.
Goodbye, Stone.
For your thoughts, I will pay 6 grub fars.
If that's your way of asking me if I'm okay, don't worry, I'm fine. I never got to finish high school because of this. And when I was at the Hive, for a while there, I actually felt normal.
I did not know you before, so to me, you are normal.
Superman mocks Batman and Green Lantern as he fights them, is so sickeningly self-confident, and doesn't have a care in the world about Metropolis, given how much he seems to intentionally destroy it during his many battles. Hal Jordan is definitely the worst though, and that's pretty bad considering he's the closest thing to a main character we've got. He is the first hero that we see after all. He's the only one with an actual arc, one which he really shouldn't need given his station. This Hal Jordan has a superiority complex of sorts, where he's constantly trying to prove to people how strong and capable he is. But he was an ace pilot. He was chosen by the Ring and has met the Guardians and presumably other members of the Green Lantern Corps, so he really shouldn't be feeling this way, I think. Like, his big revelation, that Batman literally just says outright to him, by the way, is that he needs to start thinking bigger than himself.
This is bigger than I am, and it's bigger than you are. Get out of your own way. Focus on what's important here. Everyone else.
He's a f***ing Green Lantern, you morons. Their entire purpose is to sacrifice and keep the universe safe using their infinite powers. He would have to think bigger than himself to be a member of the Corps. Overall, it's the characters that stick out to me as the worst aspect of the movie. As is common with these ensemble pieces, no time is given to develop most of them, and more often than not, they just become props to be used in action scenes. And let's talk about those action scenes, shall we? I came into this movie expecting the worst. The footage I'd seen prior and from my brother's stories and from the other New 52 movies I've seen, I was planning on coming up to bat and just knocking it out of the park, tearing this movie down piece by piece and bemoaning the slow death of 2D Western animation. Yet, I have to eat my words partially. A lot of this movie looks good, and if it didn't, it was often trying something new and difficult, like a first-person perspective or something like that. Now, I'm not going to say that the movie as a whole looks good. The color palette is rather drab, there's not very many varieties of locations, and, more stuff I'll get into momentarily. I'd say it has brief highs that exceeded my expectations, but also some very, very stark lows as well. But for the most part, it was pretty standard and unimpressive. In general, whenever beam attacks or other flashy effects are happening, I think that the movie looks good. The lighting and camera work serve well for this kind of action. However, whenever there's a relatively normal hands-to-hand encounter, however brief, the movie usually resorts to copious shaky cam and that awful choppiness that will become standard. And as well, there are just singularly awful moments. I want to point out my favorite scene in the movie, and my favorite bad moments of the whole catalog. It's when Darkseid first appears and Hal Jordan goes up to fight him. It's literally 6 seconds, but it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Green Lantern, cocky guy that he is, forms a gauntlet, dashes at Darkseid, hits him, no response, Darkseid hits him away and into a building, and immediately as he lands, parademons fly down on cue and repeatedly punch him. This is a masterwork of awful direction, and we're going to use it to look at some of the fundamentals of action direction in animation, okay? And before I start, I want you to know that I have the utmost respect for the animators and directors that worked on this movie. For everything I've heard, DC Comics and Warner Brothers more broadly are absolutely awful to work with, and that they got something out that looked even halfway complete under what must have been horrific conditions and deadlines is impressive in itself. That said, I'm about to rip them a new one by shitting on everything about this isolated clip. So first, we need to try and establish the tone of the action beats, and I honestly can't do that for this one. How the parademons comedically swoop down and do that cartoony beat-up animation loop is so funny that it has to be intentionally so. But this is the introduction to the main villain, and this is meant to show us how big and tough he is, so it's conflicting with itself. There are many ways to establish tone, from lighting to the music to the dialogue, and all of them fail to properly convey what War wants us to feel in this moment. A good example of tone conveyed properly is the final fight in Sword of the Stranger. These two men have not met each other, have not spoken to each other, and have not heard about each other. Yet the shot placement and the music serve to inform us that this is a big deal, that these guys are the two greatest swordsmen in the world and they're about to go at it. And when they do, we're told that it's huge. So that's the first thing that this bit fails at. Second, we have the build-up. In animation, as well as storytelling and comedy, build-up and payoff are the broad things that you're going for if you're creating something. Expectations also play into this part. Alan Becker has a great series of videos about the different aspects of animation, and several parts of it explain the technical workings of how to animate proper build-ups and payoffs. For a great breakdown of how this can be done both well and poorly, I would also recommend Zeon's Content Graveyards video on the animation in Dragon Ball Super, though keep in mind that he fails to consider the non-consumer side of things, namely how that show had a notoriously troubled production. For an example a bit closer to home, and for the basic purposes of this video, we'll be comparing this to another DC animated scene of Superman punching Darkseid at the end of his World of Cardboard speech. So for War, we have 3 shots to worry about, each lazily tracking Green Lantern from afar and doing nothing to convey any kind of emotion or impact. If you slow down the footage, we see that Green Lantern didn't even properly follow through with the punch, which either conveys more cockiness, but from the voice acting, we can surmise that this was supposed to be more or less a full power hit. The actual punching shot is so fast and so shaky, because any hand-to-hand combat in this movie is accompanied by shaky cam, that we're unlikely to get any semblance of actual damage or impact, even if the raw animation was supposed to convey that, which we've already established isn't likely. Then, Green Lantern gets shot back an indeterminate distance, likely to this building here, which makes it maybe 30 feet, and only makes a small crater in the building, which is incredibly weak sauce compared to the feats Darkseid shows later. And if you want to make the argument that he was simply playing with Green Lantern, no, he had absolutely no logical reason for not just ripping the guy in half right there, so we're moving on. And aside from the hilarious Parademon beatdown, I want to point out that Green Lantern impacts perfectly in that generic, cartoony kind of spread eagle way, which is unlikely to happen in real life. To really starkly compare bad to good, we'll look at that aforementioned World of Cardboard punch. Notice the difference in craft? First, we see Superman building his strength, tensing up, and then launching forward, leaving behind a wave of dust from the takeoff, before jumping into a close tracking shot with a distorted view of the environment to portray just how fast he's moving, followed by a final build-up to the punch, complete with a battle shout, before we see a slow-motion shot with ripples and shockwaves and impact of the punch, complete with a bass drop for the sound effect. And finally, we see Darkseid flying backwards at an incredible speed. The weight and general effect of these two scenes couldn't be more different, and I think that's a real shame. And if you're complaining that the two scenes had different contexts, that one was the start of a fight and the other was the end, I would agree with you. However, the intention of each, from their shot compositions, was meant to convey a build-up and payoff, and one succeeded, whereas the other is a comedy act. But guys, aside from those major things, I don't really have a lot to say about this movie. If I had to mention the New 52 designs, I would say that I liked them for the most part. The only one I really took issue with was Wonder Woman's. I'm not a fan of the athletic girl aesthetic for her, and I prefer her to be more red themed in the torso rather than blue, because I felt Superman had the blue thing down. And just as one more complaint, 3 of the 6 guys on the team so blatantly hit on and want to fuck Wonder Woman, which for Billy Batson can be expected because he's a horny teenager, but both Green Lantern and Superman's only real interactions with her involve them being smitten with her, implying that they see her as a piece of meat, given that this is literally all they express toward her, and I just found that kind of gross. But I suppose part of the problem is due to the fast pace not allowing more meaningful interactions, which I went into earlier. Overall, Justice League War is a below-average foray into the New 52 universe, and felt too similar at times to the other mediocre Justice League films, such as Crisis on Two Earths or The New Frontier. The characters were bland, irritating, or at best, alright. The story was as generic as it gets, and there is no real substance to be found here other than in the technical aspects of the animation, which is, as I said before, hit or miss. As a Justice League origin story, I'd take the series' first few episodes over this any day. I can only hope that future New 52 installments won't be so underwhelming.